Have you ever experienced a moment so shocking it felt like time froze? That's exactly what happened when a 41-year-old millionaire named Richard locked eyes with Bella, an 18-year-old waitress who looked strikingly like his late wife. Imagine the disbelief and emotions flooding him as he realized this young woman might hold secrets tied to his painful past. From clandestine hospital records to heartfelt late-night confrontations, their intertwined destinies created a riveting mystery neither of them could walk away from. Curious about what happens when grief collides with the possibilities of second chances? Join us to uncover every tense twist and touching revelation in this emotional journey. It's a story about love, loss, and the power of hope that refuses to fade, no matter how impossible it seems. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust us, you won't want to miss a single chapter or the incredible conclusion that awaits. The elegant hush of refined conversation echoed through the upscale restaurant, intermingling with the soft melodic strains of a piano near the bar. Under glittering crystal chandeliers that bathed the room in a warm golden glow, the diners seemed at ease. Each table displayed pristine white linens and gleaming silverware, a testament to the establishment's high standards. Tucked away near a dramatic floor-to-ceiling window was Richard Morgan, a 41-year-old millionaire whose presence would typically draw discreet but curious glances from the surrounding patrons. Tonight, however, no one seemed to notice that his attention was elsewhere. His posture was rigid, and his gaze often drifted to the stormy sky outside. Faint flashes of lightning illuminated the distant horizon, but the internal turmoil he felt overshadowed any spectacle of nature. A business partner sat across from him, a man with a thick binder of market analyses and boundless enthusiasm for proposed expansions. He spoke in a steady, practiced tone about quarterly projections and investor relations. But Richard absorbed almost nothing. Instead, he stirred the bourbon in his glass with a listless air, the ice slowly dissolving as he wrestled with memories he often tried to bury. This ritual of half-listening had become a habit over the years, born out of a grief that had never truly subsided. In the midst of that muted reverie, a soft, clear voice cut through. "Excuse me, sir," the voice said, its tone polite but with an undertone of warmth. "May I take your order?" Richard's thoughts momentarily scattered. He lifted his eyes and froze. His hands, which had been absent-mindedly turning the glass, seemed to lose all coordination. The tumbler slipped from his fingers and clinked against the table's edge before toppling, causing a small splash of bourbon on the immaculate tablecloth. Yet he barely registered the mess. What rendered him motionless was the young waitress standing before him, her features startlingly reminiscent of a woman he had loved and lost. Her hair, the delicate shape of her face, and most unnervingly, her eyes, those deep hazel eyes, were strikingly similar to those that once belonged to Alicia, his late wife. Though thunder rumbled in the distance, the clamor of the restaurant grew strangely distant to Richard in that instant. He could hear his heart thudding in his ears, and for a moment he felt as though he had fallen through a portal in time. The waitress, Bella Adams, wore a professional smile that wavered slightly at his obvious shock. She appeared both concerned and puzzled. "Are you all right, sir?" Bella asked gently. Richard forced himself to blink, heat rising to his face. I'm fine," he murmured, though his chest constricted painfully. He wanted to speak again, to ask questions that swarmed his mind, but found he lacked the composure to do so. Bella, sensing his discomfort, gave a small nod and retreated politely, leaving him with the menu. In her wake, Richard felt the first tremor of a realization he had tried to deny for years. The past was not yet done with him. Even after Bella departed, Richard remained at the table, stunned. His business partner continued speaking, but the words rang hollow. The polished silverware and expensive decor no longer registered. The only images filling Richard's mind were memories of Alicia. He recalled her laugh, the gentle tilt of her head, and most of all, those warm hazel eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. It was surreal to see such a close resemblance in Bella, a stranger whose features resurrected everything he had tried to bury. The storm outside intensified, droplets of rain tapping against the tall windows. Richard's reflections looped back to the day Alicia was taken from him, a hospital room filled with the relentless beeping of monitors, the sterile white walls that felt like a prison. She had been gone for nearly 2 decades, and in that time he had learned to compartmentalize his grief, storing it in a locked chamber of his heart. For years, the numbness had kept him functioning, especially in the cutthroat world of business, where hesitancy or vulnerability could cost millions. But now, with one look at Bella, those carefully built walls had begun to crack. He glanced around, realizing his partner had paused mid-sentence, concern furrowing his brow. Without offering more than a whispered apology, Richard stood abruptly. He grabbed his coat from the back of the chair and strode out of the restaurant, ignoring the puzzled stares of other patrons. The tension coiled in his chest demanded immediate release. A moment to breathe, away from the crowd and from Bella's haunting face. Outside, the rain fell in sheets, drenching him within seconds of stepping onto the sidewalk. The urban skyline loomed in front of him, blurred by falling water and flecks of lightning. He inhaled sharply, letting the cold rainwater stream down his cheeks as though it could wash away the turmoil inside. If only it were that simple. He had encountered lookalikes in the past, a fleeting glimpse of someone with Alicia's hairstyle or someone who wore the same shade of lipstick, but never before had he seen such an uncanny reflection. The possibility flitted through his mind that he might be losing his grip on reality, that grief was twisting his perception. Yet those eyes had been too precise to dismiss as a figment of his imagination. Clinging to a nearby railing, he leaned forward, steadying himself against the onslaught of emotion. His mind raced with questions. Who was Bella Adams? How could she look so much like Alicia? And above all, did he really want to resurface that deep well of heartbreak? Rainwater trickled down the back of his collar, but he barely registered the cold. For the first time in years, he felt awake, unsure if it was exhilarating or terrifying. By the time Richard hailed a car, his usually immaculate suit was soaked. The driver, accustomed to seeing him under much calmer circumstances, offered a silent, questioning look in the rearview mirror as they pulled away. Richard gave no explanation. He simply stared out at the neon lights reflecting off the rain-slicked streets, lost in thoughts he wasn't ready to share. The journey back to his penthouse was marked by silence. Even the low hum of the engine seemed distant. When the elevator finally opened onto his private floor, Richard stepped out into the hushed luxury of his home. The penthouse was expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a panoramic view of the storm-lashed city. Normally, he would find a sort of detached comfort in the modern furniture and ambient lighting, but now it felt as though the space magnified his loneliness. Without bothering to change, he walked straight to the living room, dropping his coat onto a chair. A single lamp cast enough light to reveal a framed photograph on a side table. He forced himself to look away from it, unwilling to confront Alicia's smiling face so soon after seeing Bella. Instead, he sank onto a leather couch, leaning his head back and closing his eyes. Images swirled behind his eyelids. Alicia's hospital bed, the pale fluorescent glow on her face as he held her hand, and her final words, "Promise me you'll keep living." He had promised, but the truth was that he hadn't really lived since her passing. He had existed, accumulating wealth, forging deals, but rarely engaging with the world on a deeper level. An intense wave of guilt washed over him, mingled with an unexpected flicker of something else, hope. Could Bella's appearance be some kind of cosmic nudge for him to reopen the chapters he'd left unfinished? It felt like a risk he wasn't sure he could handle. Then again, the shock of her resemblance had already cracked the shell of indifference he'd constructed. Maybe it was too late to pretend he could just go back to life as usual. Reaching for his phone, he noticed several missed calls and messages from his business partner, likely worried by his abrupt departure. He swiped them away, deciding he needed quiet more than answers to the mundane. The storm provided a soundtrack of steady rain and low thunder, underscoring his unresolved emotions. Eventually he rose, striding to the window. Lightning flashed, illuminating his reflection against the dark glass. He stared at himself, disheveled, drenched, eyes filled with turmoil. In a whisper that only he could hear, he murmured, "Alicia, what am I supposed to do?" But no answer came, only another roll of thunder echoing across the sky. Morning brought little relief to Richard. He'd slept fitfully, plagued by dreams of Alicia's last days. In the half-light before dawn, he woke and decided to revisit the restaurant. Perhaps by seeing Bella again in a more controlled context, he could at least ascertain whether his mind had played tricks on him. He dressed in a subdued suit, foregoing his typical bold tie in favor of something unassuming that might help him remain inconspicuous. When he arrived, the lunchtime crowd was just beginning to filter in. Rather than choosing a seat in the center of the dining area, he positioned himself at a small table tucked away near the back. He ordered a coffee, ignoring the inquisitive looks from the staff. Clearly, he was not their usual midday clientele. The manager, Mr. Jensen, a tall and solemn man, greeted Richard politely and asked if there was anything special he needed. Richard responded with a shake of his head, quietly scanning the room. Finally, he spotted Bella Adams. She wore a clean, pressed uniform, her hair neatly pulled back. At first glance, she seemed no different from any other server. Yet, as he watched her speak to a guest, he couldn't deny the resurgence of that haunting familiarity. The curve of her jaw, the softness in her expression when she smiled. Everything mirrored Alicia's features so closely that he felt a knot tighten in his chest. Time slipped by as he drank his coffee and observed her. Eventually, Bella glanced in his direction. Their eyes met briefly. Though she maintained a courteous demeanor, he sensed her unease. She offered a polite dip of her head, then hurried off to the kitchen, as if eager to escape the weight of his gaze. After a few minutes, Mr. Jensen approached Richard's table once more. "Mr. Morgan," and he began, "is everything all right? You've hardly touched your coffee. Can I get you something else?" His tone was polite yet tinged with a hint of apprehension. Richard shook his head again, placing the cup down. He cleared his throat, deciding to be direct. "Actually, I was hoping to learn more about Bella Adams. She served my table last night." Mr. Jensen's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Is there a problem, sir?" "No problem at all," Richard said. "She just reminds me of someone I used to know." Mr. Jensen paused, uncertainty flickering across his features, but he eventually nodded. "She's been working here for about a year. She's responsible, punctual, and taking classes at the local community college. She also looks after her younger brother Dylan, from what I understand." He hesitated. "She doesn't speak much about her personal life, but she did mention once she was adopted." The manager's words rang loudly in Richard's mind. Bella was adopted? A mix of disbelief and intrigue washed over him. Could there be a tie to Alicia that no one suspected? The possibility seemed outlandish, yet he couldn't shake it. Heart pounding, he realized he was already too deep in this mystery to walk away. In the clatter and hum of the restaurant's kitchen, Bella pressed her back against the stainless steel counter, struggling to steady her breathing. She clutched a small notepad in her hand, though all the orders on it had already been relayed. Something about Richard Morgan's intense stare unsettled her. She'd had difficult customers before, those who got under her skin for one reason or another. But this felt different. The look in his eyes was almost haunted, as though seeing her caused him genuine pain. A coworker spotted her momentary lapse and stepped over, concern evident in her tone. "Bella, you okay?" Bella forced a shaky smile. "Yeah, I'm fine, just a stressful day." She didn't want to mention Richard's name or the odd questions he might ask. The last thing she needed was workplace gossip. Truth be told, Bella had sensed something in Richard's gaze beyond mere curiosity. There was a longing, and maybe even heartbreak, in the way he studied her face. She'd been working here long enough to recognize the signs of a man in mourning, although she knew nothing about whom he might have lost. The notion that her face triggered his grief put her on edge, and also, strangely, made her pity him. But pity wasn't something she had much time for in her life. She had bills to pay, a brother to look after, and a precarious hold on her own education. Balancing part-time classes, rent, and Dylan's needs left little room for introspection about mysterious millionaires. Still, Richard Morgan was not so easily dismissed from her thoughts. Returning to the dining room, Bella forced a professional composure. She approached a table of new customers, greeting them warmly and taking their orders. She could feel Richard's presence like a shadow, but she refused to meet his eyes this time. Better to focus on her immediate tasks, to stay rooted in the here and now. Yet the question lingered. Why did he keep looking at her as though he knew her from another life? Once the rush of orders subsided, Bella snuck a glimpse at Richard's table, only to find it empty. Mr. Jensen was wiping the surface where he had been seated. She felt a vague sense of relief mixed with uncertainty. Did he leave because he got what he came for? Or because he realized she wasn't interested in conversation? Gathering her courage, she decided to put the incident behind her. She had a double shift this week. Dylan needed new textbooks, and her own tuition deadline loomed. The emotional baggage of a stranger's sorrow couldn't be allowed to derail her plans. Despite that resolve, she knew the memory of Richard's tortured expression wouldn't fade easily. That same evening, Richard sat in his private study, a room dominated by a heavy mahogany desk and walls lined with shelves of books he rarely had time to read. The glow from a single lamp revealed multiple open folders sprawled before him. Among them were documents he'd stored away for years, copies of Alicia's medical records, hospital notes, and even her death certificate. He never thought he'd revisit these painful items, but Bella's unsettling resemblance made it impossible to ignore the past. Sifting through the documents, he confirmed the details he knew by heart. Alicia had died in early 2005 at the age of 22. There was no mention of pregnancy or childbirth in her final medical reports. No relatives to contact. She had been an only child, her parents passing away before she met Richard. He'd always believed she'd left nothing behind except memories and the heavy ache in his chest. Now, the idea that she might have a biological daughter out there, Bella, upended everything. He sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. The rational side of his mind insisted that it was all an impossible coincidence. Yet the timing haunted him. Bella was 18, meaning she had been born mere months after Alicia's passing, adopted with no recorded biological parents. Could Alicia have been pregnant and kept it a secret, fearing it would compromise Richard's bustling career or her own fragile health? The questions swirled like leaves caught in a storm, refusing to settle. At last, he reached for his phone and dialed a private investigator he trusted, Connor. After a few rings, Connor's calm voice answered. "Richard, this is unexpected. Everything all right?" "I need you to look into someone," Richard said curtly, providing Bella Adams's name, her approximate age, and the scant details he had gleaned. "Be discreet. I don't want to scare her." Connor expressed mild surprise but assured him he'd handle it. When the call ended, Richard sank into a long silence, the weight of his own request pressing on him. He felt uneasy, almost predatory, for delving into Bella's life without her permission. But he needed answers, and he needed them soon. Rising to his feet, he walked to a nearby window, gazing down at the city lights below. Cars moved like tiny specks, their headlights merging into a river of glowing red and white. Alicia's face flashed in his mind, her laughter, her tenderness, the echo of her last words urging him to keep living. If Bella was indeed Alicia's daughter, how many more secrets had Alicia left behind? And would unearthing them bring closure or reopen a wound he had never truly healed? Bella returned home to her small apartment late that night, shrugging off a drizzle of rain from her jacket. The space was modest, bare walls, mismatched furniture, yet cozy in its own way. Her younger brother Dylan sat at a second-hand desk with a lamp that flickered periodically, paging through a thick textbook. He looked up as Bella entered, concern etched in his features. "You're back late," he remarked, setting his pencil aside. "Everything all right?" Bella managed a tired smile. "Yeah, just a busy shift." She threw her keys onto a rickety side table that threatened to collapse under their weight. Despite the tension swirling in her thoughts about Richard Morgan, she wanted to keep Dylan shielded from any drama that wasn't absolutely necessary. He had his own challenges, balancing high school studies, scholarship applications, and the lingering grief of losing their adoptive mother 2 years prior. "How's your homework?" she asked, glancing at the piles of papers spread across the desk. Dylan rubbed his eyes. "It's okay. Math is giving me a headache, but I'll manage." He paused, then added softly, "You seem distracted. Want to talk about it?" For a moment, Bella considered telling him about Richard, about how he seemed convinced she reminded him of someone important. But the weight of it felt too heavy to drop on Dylan's shoulders. She shook her head. "I'm fine, just tired." He studied her face for a moment, looking unconvinced, then shrugged. "All right, but you know I'm here if you need me, right?" "Yeah, I know." Bella forced another smile, appreciating how Dylan had matured in recent years. Their bond, cemented by the loss of their adoptive parents, was the foundation of her life. She would do anything to protect him, including keeping certain matters to herself. Retreating to the small kitchenette, Bella prepared a quick meal from whatever was left in the fridge, instant noodles and some wilted vegetables. She ate standing up, her back against the counter, as she replayed the day's events in her mind. The image of Richard Morgan flashed repeatedly. Why had his gaze held such a potent mix of sorrow and recognition? By the time she finished her makeshift dinner, she decided she was too drained to dwell on mysteries. Dylan still needed to study, and she needed sleep for her early class the next morning. She offered him a quick goodnight, stepping into the cramped bedroom they shared. Flopping onto her twin mattress, she stared at the ceiling in the darkness. Sleep eventually claimed her, but not before the thought flickered once more. What if Richard Morgan was right? What if her past held a connection so profound it could alter everything she believed about who she was? In the quiet room, punctuated only by Dylan's rhythmic breathing, Bella felt her guard slip just enough to let uncertainty creep in. Early the next day, across town, Richard paced in his opulent office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a sprawling metropolis of glass towers and bustling streets. The morning sun cut through the leftover haze of the previous night's rain, but the warmth offered him no comfort. He was waiting somewhat impatiently for Connor's report. While he had requested discretion, the tension of not knowing threatened to erode his fragile composure. His phone buzzed. Snatching it up, he read a short text. "Meet me at the usual place. Noon." That was Connor's style, concise and cryptic. Closing a folder of half-completed work, Richard grabbed his suit jacket and left, telling his assistant, Helen, he'd be out for a while. Helen offered a polite nod, but her perceptive eyes seemed to notice the lines of stress on Richard's face. By noon, he was seated at a quiet corner of a small cafe known only to a select few. Connor arrived, dressed unremarkably in a neutral blazer, and slid into the seat opposite Richard. Without preamble, he opened a manila folder. "I found some records," Connor began. Bella Adams, born April 10, 2005, adopted that same year by Michael and Clara Adams. No father or mother listed in the adoption file. The adoption agency's notes are vague, simply stating that she was left in the care of a small community hospital before being transferred to them. Richard's heart thumped. The timing fit uncomfortably well. Alicia had died in January 2005. Could she have somehow given birth shortly before her passing, or had her death date been recorded incorrectly? He frowned, examining the documents. "There's nothing else?" he asked. Connor shook his head. "That's it. No mention of Alicia or any other link to your past. But the adoption circumstances were unusual. No record of the mother checking in, no details about the father. The only thing that stands out is that Bella was healthy, well cared for. She appeared to have no medical complications." Richard closed the folder with a trembling hand. As improbable as it seemed, there was no direct contradiction here. If Alicia had indeed hidden a pregnancy, whether out of fear, illness, or something else, Bella could be her child. Or this could still be a monumental coincidence. But the more he stared at Bella's photograph, paper-clipped to the documents, the more convinced he became that there was a truth lurking just below the surface. Before they parted, Connor placed a reassuring hand on Richard's shoulder. "Be careful," he cautioned. "Sometimes discovering the truth doesn't bring the peace you expect." Richard nodded, swallowing hard. He understood. The deeper he dug, the more the past might break him. But if Bella truly was Alicia's daughter, he couldn't walk away from her, nor from the memory of the woman he still loved. 2 days later, Richard found himself back at the restaurant, determined to confront Bella, but uncertain how. He took his usual seat, ordering nothing more than a glass of water this time. The midday crowd was thinner, but he still noticed the curious glances from staff who recognized him. He waited, nerves strung tight, until he finally saw Bella step out from the kitchen, tying on an apron. She appeared momentarily startled to see him, but resumed her calm professionalism and walked over to his table. Setting down a menu, she offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon, sir," she said. "Is there anything I can get for you?" Richard tried to keep his voice steady. "Actually, Bella, I was hoping we could talk for a moment. Would that be possible?" He felt the tension coil in his chest, unsure if she would bolt again. Her eyes flicked to Mr. Jensen, who stood nearby, observing. After a quick, uncertain exchange of glances, the manager gave a subtle nod. Bella exhaled slowly and seated herself across from Richard. Her posture was stiff, as if ready to spring away at any moment. Richard cleared his throat. "I know how this must look," he began, heart pounding. "You and I barely know each other, and yet I keep showing up. I'm not here to scare you or make you uncomfortable, but I have reasons to believe you might be connected to someone who was very dear to me, someone I lost many years ago." Bella's brow furrowed. "You keep hinting at that. Something about your late wife, right?" He nodded. "Her name was Alicia. She died in 2005. He paused, watching Bella's face for any flash of recognition. "But she might have had a child. The records are incomplete. The timing of your birth," he swallowed, finding the words difficult. "It's too close to be a coincidence." Bella's face went pale. She licked her lips, choosing her next words carefully. "Adopted or not, my real parents are the people who raised me," she said quietly. "I never needed to find my birth mother or father, and now you show up, telling me I might be someone's daughter, a woman you still mourn. How do you think that makes me feel?" Her voice trembled slightly, and Richard noticed her tightly clasped hands on the table. "I understand," he said, voice low. "I don't want to disrupt your life, but I can't walk away from this possibility. If there's even a chance you're Alicia's daughter, I need to know." Bella pushed her chair back. She stood, glancing at Mr. Jensen, who hovered in the background. "I can't do this right now," she managed, tears threatening to spill. "I'm sorry, but I have tables to serve." Without waiting for his reply, she retreated to the kitchen, leaving Richard with an ache in his chest deeper than he'd felt in years. By the time her shift ended, Bella felt emotionally drained. She slipped out through the back entrance of the restaurant, hoping to avoid any further encounter with Richard. But to her surprise, she found him there, leaning against a nearby wall with a solemn expression. The evening air carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement, and the sky was tinged with a purplish twilight. At first, Bella considered walking away without a word, yet she hesitated, recalling the raw honesty in his eyes. For all the confusion and fear he had stirred in her, she sensed he was grappling with his own pain. Taking a steadying breath, she approached him. Richard straightened upon seeing her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I've been pushing you." Bella shifted the bag slung over her shoulder, hugging it like a shield. "You have," she agreed, her tone guarded, but less hostile than before. "It's overwhelming." Nodding, Richard let out a long exhale. "I'm not going to force this on you, but if you change your mind, if you ever decide you want to know more about Alicia, about what might have happened all those years ago, I'll be here." Something in Bella's chest tightened at his quiet sincerity. She studied his face, lined with sorrow and heavy with regret. "Why do you care so much about a stranger? If I'm not who you think I am, you're just—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "That's exactly it," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know if you're Alicia's daughter, but if there's even a sliver of a chance, I can't turn my back. Alicia was my wife. We planned a future together. If she left behind a part of herself, wouldn't you want me to find it? To give that person, maybe you, some part of the love and care she never got to see?" Bella swallowed hard, memories of her own adoptive parents surfacing. They had offered her that kind of unconditional love, and she wondered if Alicia could have done the same if she'd lived. The prospect was both comforting and terrifying. She gave a short, reluctant nod. "I get it, even if I don't like it." An awkward silence settled. Finally, Bella spoke again. "I need time. It's a lot to take in. My life is complicated enough. College, bills, Dylan's needs. I don't know if I can carry this too." Richard inclined his head. "I understand, truly. I won't bother you again unless you reach out." He stepped away, giving her space as if signifying he would keep his word. With a final searching look, Bella turned and walked off into the coming night. Her thoughts churned between resentment and an unsettling curiosity. Though she refused to say it aloud, part of her worried that if she avoided this chance forever, she might always wonder what secrets her past held, and whether meeting Richard was more than mere chance. On a Thursday afternoon, Bella arrived home from her final class of the day, fatigue weighing on her shoulders. She paused by the mailbox in the dimly lit lobby of her apartment building, expecting nothing more than the usual stack of flyers and maybe a utility bill. Instead, she found a plain white envelope with her name carefully printed on the front. No return address, no hint of who had sent it. Curiosity piqued, she tore it open while climbing the worn stairs to her apartment. Inside was a single letter from the finance office of her community college, stating that her semester's tuition had been fully paid. Her heart thumped. She stopped halfway up the stairs, rereading the letter to confirm she wasn't misunderstanding. According to the statement, she owed nothing for the remainder of the term. Bella's first thought was that it had to be a mistake, some clerical error. Yet the letter was explicit, citing no outstanding balance. She hurried into the apartment and found Dylan hunched over his laptop, textbooks splayed around him. "Dylan," she called, her voice tight with both excitement and confusion. "Did you do something about my tuition?" He pushed his reading glasses up on his nose and blinked at her. "What? I can barely handle my own tuition, Bella. What's going on?" Bella thrust the letter at him, shaking it slightly. "It says it's all paid off, every cent, but I never applied for any new scholarship or anything like that." Dylan read the paper quickly, then shot her a baffled look. "I have no idea. Could it be a friend, maybe Miss Hawkins from church, who used to help with your books? Or an anonymous donation?" But Bella's mind jumped to Richard Morgan. Her stomach twisted. Ever since he had appeared in her life, asking pointed questions about her past, claiming she might be the daughter of his late wife, things had felt off balance. Yes, his intentions might be good, but this kind of gesture felt invasive. She wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or furious. She snatched the letter back and set her rack on the wobbly kitchen table. "This has to be him, Dylan," she said, feeling an odd mix of indignation, relief, and guilt. "Richard Morgan. He's the only person who even hinted he knew I had money troubles. But why would he do it this way, secretly?" Dylan shrugged, sympathy in his eyes. "Maybe he thought you'd refuse if he offered outright." Bella closed her eyes, battling a tangle of emotions. On one hand, this solved a looming financial crisis. She could continue her studies without sinking further into debt. On the other, it felt like Richard had invaded her personal space without asking. She couldn't just let it slide. After a moment's hesitation, Bella grabbed her keys again. "I'm going to his penthouse. I don't care if it's late. I need answers." Dylan started to protest, but she waved him off. "I'll be careful, I promise." With the letter clutched in her hand, she dashed out the door, her heart pounding like a drum. She didn't know what she would say to Richard Morgan, only that she couldn't ignore this any longer. The sun was already dipping below the city skyline by the time Bella made it to the building where Richard Morgan lived. Towering at least 50 stories high, the glass and steel structure shimmered with modern affluence. A doorman stood at the entrance, impeccably dressed, greeting her with a polite nod that quickly turned to a questioning look when she asked for Richard Morgan. "Mr. Morgan hasn't mentioned any visitors this evening, miss. May I ask your name?" the doorman inquired, his tone courteous yet firm. Bella cleared her throat, feeling suddenly self-conscious in her faded jeans and light jacket. "Bella Adams," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's urgent." She held up the envelope as though it were proof of something. The doorman disappeared behind a granite-top reception desk, made a quick phone call, and then gestured for Bella to proceed. "Take the elevator on the left to the top floor," he instructed, pressing a key card to the elevator panel so that she could access the private level. Stepping into the elevator, Bella studied her reflection in the gleaming mirrors. Her face was flushed from the rush of adrenaline, her hair slightly tousled from hurrying. The elevator rose at a smooth but rapid pace, and by the time the doors opened on Richard's floor, her heart was hammering against her ribs. She crossed a short, marble-floored hallway until she reached a single, imposing door. Summoning her courage, she knocked firmly. After a few moments of tense silence, Richard appeared. His expression shifted from surprise to concern as he took in Bella's anxious stance, the crumpled letter clutched in her fingers. "Bella," he said, stepping aside to let her in. His penthouse was softly lit, an expanse of tasteful modern decor framing an unobstructed view of the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She barely registered her surroundings, too focused on the turmoil swirling in her mind. Without waiting for him to offer her a seat, she held up the letter. "Did you do this? Pay for my tuition? Because if you did, I want to know why." Her voice trembled, a mixture of anger and an undercurrent of gratefulness she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. Richard nodded almost imperceptibly. "I did," he said quietly. "I'm sorry if it seems intrusive." Bella let out a sharp exhale, her grip on the paper tightening. "So, you're going around checking on my finances now? You think that's okay?" He raised his hands, palms outward, in a gesture of surrender. "I didn't do it to pry into your affairs. I did it because I can help, and I wanted to. You've been through enough, Bella. You're juggling so much already. Your Choyam, your brother, school. I just didn't want you to struggle the way I once did after Alicia passed." A weighted silence fell, both of them aware that this was about more than money. Bella fought the urge to snap at him, unsure whether to lash out or to feel relief that someone cared enough to ease her burden. She settled on a single question, her voice barely above a whisper. "But why me, Richard?" Richard motioned for Bella to sit on a plush white sofa, but she remained standing, her posture rigid. Taking a slow breath, he answered her query with as much honesty as he could manage. "Because you might be my late wife's daughter," he said, voice hushed. "And even if you're not, I see a young woman who reminds me so much of Alicia. I can't just stand by and do nothing." Bella felt her stomach clench. The envelope in her hands rustled softly, a tangible reminder of how personal this situation had become. "It's not your responsibility," she whispered, though her tone was less confrontational than before. "I'm not a charity case, and I'm definitely not some stand-in for Alicia." His eyes flickered with hurt, and he nodded. "I know you're not. I realize how this might come across, but it isn't about finding a replacement. It's more that if there's any possibility Alicia had a child, I need to honor that. And if you're that child, I owe you everything I can give to make up for all the lost time." Her mouth went dry. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, the letter slipping from her grasp and fluttering onto the coffee table. For a moment, she stared at the city lights glittering through the window, as if the metropolis itself might offer clarity. She finally managed to speak. "I get it, I do. But this is just too huge. I can't wrap my mind around it. My adoptive parents, they were all I needed." Richard lowered himself onto a nearby chair, maintaining a careful distance as though afraid to crowd her. "That's entirely valid. I'm not trying to tear apart what you had with them. I respect it. But if there's even a chance, you deserve the truth, Bella." A tear escaped her eye before she could stop it. She swiped at it furiously, refusing to let emotions overwhelm her. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "What if we dig into the past and find nothing? Or what if we find something that changes how I see myself, or how Dylan sees me? Everything could unravel." Richard wanted to comfort her, but he refrained from reaching out. Instead, he spoke softly. "That fear is natural. I've been afraid too. Afraid to face the idea that Alicia might have been pregnant without telling me. Afraid I failed her. But the only thing worse than knowing is never knowing." They locked eyes for a charged moment. In that silence, Bella realized she was at a crossroads. Either she walked away now, leaving Richard's claims forever unconfirmed, or she took a step forward into a mystery that might upend her life. She pressed her palms against her knees, inhaling shakily. "Okay," she whispered. Maybe I'll let you help me look for answers." A flicker of relief crossed Richard's face at Bella's hesitant agreement. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I won't push you," he said quietly, "but I'm here whenever you decide you want to take that step. And if you want me to stay out of it, just say the word." Bella found it difficult to hold his gaze. The swirl of emotions inside her felt like a whirlpool. Gratitude, confusion, fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. She stood up from the sofa, pacing to the glass wall where the entire city stretched before her, illuminated by streetlights and neon signs. Something about that panoramic view reminded her of the vast unknown that lay ahead. She placed a hand against the glass. "I'll be honest, if I do this, I need time and space. I'll have to tell Dylan. I can't just drop this bomb on him without explaining." "Of course," Richard answered. "He's your brother. Whatever you decide, he should know. You two have a bond that's obviously very strong." Turning around, Bella studied Richard for a moment. In the low lamplight, the lines of worry etched on his face stood out more prominently. She suddenly realized this man had carried a deep sadness for nearly 2 decades, and that sadness led him to her doorstep. Despite her lingering reservations, a flicker of empathy sparked within her. "I'll see you out," Richard offered, standing from his chair. Together, they walked toward the penthouse entrance. As he opened the door, she paused under the threshold. "Thank you," she said softly, and though her tone was hesitant, the gratitude was genuine. "Paying my tuition might have been invasive, but it also helps me more than you know. I wish you'd talk to me first." He dipped his head in acknowledgement. "I'm sorry about that. I was worried you'd reject it out of pride or fear. It was wrong of me to decide for you." Bella breathed out slowly. "Just don't do anything like that again, without asking, okay?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of Richard's mouth. "Understood." With that, she stepped into the hallway, enveloped by the quiet hush that seemed to linger on this private floor. Her footsteps echoed as she made her way to the elevator, the weight of the conversation resting heavily on her shoulders. She didn't know where this tentative alliance would lead, whether it would confirm her long-held identity or dismantle it. But for the first time, she sensed that she wasn't alone in seeking whatever lay behind the closed doors of her past. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Bella closed her eyes, picturing the possibility that somewhere in the swirl of memories and mysteries, the truth about Alicia might bring both pain and healing. One thing felt certain: her life was no longer the same. The next day, Bella returned to her usual routine: classes in the morning, a quick shift at the restaurant, then home to study. But nothing felt quite the same. The conversation with Richard lingered in her mind, blending with memories of her adoptive parents who had never once hinted that her birth mother could still be connected to anyone alive. She recalled how they used to reassure her whenever she had questions. "We chose you, Bella. You're ours forever." At the time, it had been enough to quiet her curiosity. After her shift, she found Dylan on the living room couch, flipping through television channels. His own homework lay abandoned on the coffee table, overshadowed by a half-eaten bowl of cereal. He glanced up when she walked in, immediately catching the tension in her posture. "Hey," he greeted, switching off the TV. "What happened last night? You came in late and I was half asleep." Bella shed her jacket and dropped onto the armchair. She hesitated, but there was no point in lying to Dylan. "I talked to Richard Morgan," she finally said, her voice subdued. "You know, the guy from the restaurant." Dylan's eyebrows shot up. "Yeah, the one who keeps staring at you like he's seen a ghost?" Bella huffed a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's him. So, he paid my tuition." Dylan's mouth fell open. "Wait, seriously? How? Why?" The explanation spilled out in stops and starts: her confrontation at his penthouse, the possibility that Bella might be his late wife's daughter, the fear and confusion. By the end, Dylan looked just as shaken as Bella felt. "So you mean there's a chance you're related to him?" he asked quietly, eyes wide with uncertainty. Bella nodded, fiddling with a thread on the armchair cushion. "Alicia died around the same time I was born. It's Everything aligns too closely to ignore, but I don't know how I feel about it. It feels like someone threw a grenade into my life and I'm just waiting for the explosion." They fell silent for a moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. Finally, Dylan reached over and placed a reassuring hand on Bella's wrist. "You know, no matter what, you're my sister. That's never going to change. If this turns out to be real, or if it's just a weird coincidence, we'll handle it. Okay?" Her eyes misted over with gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured. Dylan's unwavering support soothed a sliver of her anxiety, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this bizarre quest for the truth. After a moment, she squared her shoulders, a hint of determination surfacing. "Richard said he'd give me space, but I think I need to do something. Maybe talk to the adoption agency, check old hospital records, anything that could confirm or deny his theory." Dylan gave a firm nod. "I'm right behind you, whatever you decide." And with that, the fragile seed of a plan began to take root in Bella's mind. Over the next week, Bella's every spare moment was consumed by research. She contacted the adoption agency that had facilitated her placement as an infant, only to find their records sparse and outdated. Many files from that period had been moved to digital archives, while others were lost due to poor record keeping. Frustrated but undeterred, She pressed for any clue. Names of social workers, old addresses, anything that might point toward her biological mother's identity. Simultaneously, she navigated the demands of her usual schedule. She'd work her shift at the restaurant, smiling politely at customers while a storm churned in her mind. During break times, she'd dash off emails or make phone calls, trying to unearth even a scrap of information. Dylan helped when he could, though he had his own academic load to manage. One afternoon, Bella stepped into the staff locker room after her shift, feeling a dull ache in her lower back. She hadn't slept well in days. As she retrieved her jacket, she spotted a text from Richard lighting up her phone's screen. "How are you holding up? Found anything yet? I'm here if you need to talk." Her first instinct was annoyance. She didn't want him hovering, but she also couldn't deny that he might be a resource, even just emotionally. A wave of weariness washed over her, and she found herself typing a brief reply. "It's been tough, but I'm trying. Might have some leads. I'll keep you posted." Later at home, she updated Dylan on her lack of progress. He suggested they consider checking local hospitals for birth records around her birth date. It was a shot in the dark, but Bella latched onto the idea. Together, they compiled a list of every hospital and clinic in the county, planning to systematically contact each. The following day, Bella awoke early with renewed vigor. She set up camp at the kitchen table, laptop open, phone at her side, a notebook filled with scribbles and phone numbers. With each call, she identified herself and politely asked if the hospital might have records of a baby girl named Baby Doe or Infant Unknown in April 2005. Predictably, most staff either had no information or cited privacy laws as a barrier. By mid-afternoon, discouragement weighed heavily. Bella sighed, resting her forehead on her palm, when yet another receptionist regretfully informed her they had no record matching her description. She was about to end the call when the woman paused. "Wait, let me check something else," the receptionist said, her voice muffled as she tapped away at a computer. After a moment, she returned. "There's a note about an infant brought in without a formal name. The file doesn't have any definitive parent data, but it does mention a possible link to a larger hospital downtown. Would you like that phone number?" Bella's heart lurched. "Yes, please," she said, scribbling it down with shaking fingers. It was the first solid lead she'd encountered, and even though it was tenuous at best, hope began to blossom. Maybe, just maybe, she was inching closer to the truth that both terrified and compelled her. That evening, Bella stared at the phone number for the larger hospital downtown, feeling both excitement and dread. The single scrap of information wasn't guaranteed to be connected to her birth, but it was better than the dead ends she'd been hitting. After mustering her courage, she dialed. A receptionist answered. Bella explained her situation carefully. An adopted individual seeking to confirm her place of birth, possibly recorded under an unnamed infant in April 2005. There was a brief shuffle as the receptionist transferred her call to someone in records management. Bella repeated her story, voice unsteady, hoping this final step wouldn't be another closed door. "To access detailed medical files," the records clerk began kindly, "you'd need either proof of a direct biological connection or a court order. I'm afraid I can't release anything sensitive." Bella's heart sank. "I understand, but I don't know who my biological mother is. That's, that's the point." She exhaled shakily, glancing over at Dylan, who sat nearby, listening with concern. There was a pause. "Let me see if I can verify whether the child you're referring to was indeed treated here," the clerk said. "I can at least confirm or deny that much." Bella chewed on her lower lip, every second of dead air feeling interminable. In the background, she heard faint clicking, keystrokes presumably, as the clerk searched databases. When the voice came back, it held a cautious note of encouragement. "We do have a record matching the date and approximate circumstances you described. An infant brought in with no information on the mother. It was a short stay, then the baby was transferred to a foster system representative. I can't say more, but yes, that child was here." Tears prickled at Bella's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, swallowing hard. "That helps more than you know." After ending the call, she and Dylan shared a long look. It felt surreal to have this confirmation. No name, no direct mention of Alicia, but proof that Bella's birth mother hadn't been recorded. With that tiny sliver of data, the pieces were shifting. Could Alicia have been the unnamed patient? Or had someone else dropped Bella off in Alicia's place? The question buzzed like static in her mind. Bella sat back, rubbing her temples. I think I'm going to need Richard's help, she said at last, her words tasting bittersweet. He has resources, and I don't. If we want to get deeper records or contact people who handled adoptions back then, he might know how. Dylan raised an eyebrow, clearly wary of inviting more entanglement with the man who had already turned their lives upside down. But he trusted Bella's judgment. If that's what you decide, I'll support it, he said, softly resting a hand on her shoulder. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of burnt orange and purple. Bella realized with a sudden intensity that she was edging ever closer to an answer. One that might change everything she believed about herself, her family, and the woman named Alicia who haunted Richard's memories. The next morning, Bella summoned her nerve and texted Richard, requesting a brief meeting at the cafe near his office. Her heart fluttered the entire ride over, as if anticipation and anxiety were battling for dominance. She arrived early, finding a seat by the window so she could watch the bustling downtown crowd drift past. She wondered how many of these strangers had their own hidden stories, questions about where they came from or what they'd lost. Richard entered a few minutes later, looking equally tense. He offered a polite smile as he took the chair across from her. A waiter approached, and they both declined menus, too focused on the conversation to come. Bella began with a steadying breath. I appreciate you meeting me. I made some progress with hospital records. It's not much, but I confirmed I was treated as an unnamed infant in April 2005 at a facility downtown. That baby was transferred out to an adoption representative. No mother's details are listed. A wave of emotion flickered across Richard's face, hope, sorrow, something in between. So it's possible, Alicia, she nodded. It's possible. Or someone else entirely. I don't have enough to prove anything, but I do want to take the next step. And to be honest, I might need resources I don't have. Court orders, contacting old social workers. It could get complicated. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on the small table. Anything you need, I'll help. I can pay for legal advice, hire investigators, track down people who worked at that hospital. Whatever it takes. His eagerness was tempered by a cautious tenderness, as if he realized how delicate the situation was. Bella looked at him, searching for any sign that this was just an obsession with Alicia's memory, but what she found was a genuine concern. For her. For the truth. She nodded. All right, let's do it. They spent the next hour outlining steps, a discreet legal consultation to see what records they could access, possible DNA testing if they ever located anything linking Bella to Alicia. Bella felt a mix of relief and trepidation. Each plan inched her closer to an answer she wasn't entirely sure she wanted, but the momentum felt unstoppable now that she had come this far. As they prepared to leave, Richard paused. Bella, he said, his voice quiet, whatever happens, whether you're Alicia's daughter or not, I don't want you to feel beholden. I'm doing this because I care, not because I expect something in return. She met his gaze. Thank you, she whispered. In that moment, the cafe chatter seemed to fade, leaving just the hum of her own heartbeat. She could feel a subtle shift in their connection. No longer two strangers stumbling through a chance encounter. They had become unlikely allies, bound by a mystery that refused to let either of them go. In the weeks that followed, the wheels were set in motion. Legal inquiries began, and a private investigator, funded discreetly by Richard, started sifting through whatever archives remained from the hospital's old adoption files. Time blurred into a cycle of hope, frustration, and waiting. Bella alternated between wanting to know the truth at all costs and fearing the very possibility that Alicia was her mother. If it turned out to be true, it would mean she had unknowingly carried a piece of Richard's lost love within her for years. And if it turned out to be false, she wondered whether she'd always feel a strange hollowness at the center of her identity. Amid these swirling emotions, life pressed on. Bella continued working at the restaurant, noticing with some amusement that Mr. Jensen had grown protective of her privacy. Whenever Richard dropped by, even just to check on her, Mr. Jensen would find a reason to hover, as though ensuring Bella didn't feel cornered. In truth, Bella appreciated the gesture. It made her feel safe in a situation that often left her feeling vulnerable. Dylan also kept a close eye on her emotional state. Though he was curious about the outcome, he was more concerned about her well-being. Some evenings, they'd sit on the couch with takeout containers, talking about everything from classes to adoption laws, from Alicia's possible motivations to the future they wanted for themselves. Their bond, already strong, became unbreakable in the crucible of uncertainty. Meanwhile, Richard organized a large charity gala, reflecting his long-standing commitment to support educational opportunities, something that had taken on deeper meaning since meeting Bella. The event was held in a luxurious hotel ballroom, with shimmering lights and gentle music floating beneath the hum of donor conversations. Bella attended at Richard's invitation, partly to see the philanthropic side of a man she had only known through heartbreak and speculation. Dressed in a simple but elegant gown, chosen hastily with Dylan's help, she found herself in awe of the sophistication around her. Yet when Richard took the stage to speak about lifting the burdens of tuition and empowering the next generation, she recognized the authenticity in his words. This wasn't just about searching for Alicia's legacy, it was about channeling grief into something that could uplift others. After the applause died down, Bella and Richard shared a quiet moment near the refreshment table away from the crowd. The tension that once defined their interactions had eased into mutual respect. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, his voice laced with gratitude. Bella's lips curled into a gentle smile. "Thank you for inviting me, and for everything else." They clinked glasses of sparkling cider, neither entirely sure what the future held. Yet in that moment, they both felt a shift. Whatever the official records might reveal about Bella's birth, they had already uncovered a deeper truth. Even the most painful memories can kindle compassion, and even the most daunting questions can foster a surprising kind of hope. And so, under the glow of the chandeliers and the soft strains of music, they chose to step forward together into whatever came next. After all the hidden files were revealed and the emotional roller coaster settled, Bella and Richard found themselves facing an unexpected truth. While unraveling old secrets threatened to rip open past wounds, it ultimately wove a new bond between them, one built on understanding and compassion. Through countless doubts and uneasy confessions, they discovered that sometimes the biggest leaps of faith lead to the deepest personal growth. They also learned that family isn't solely defined by blood, but by genuine care and shared triumphs over adversity. It's a hopeful conclusion that reminds us even the darkest chapters can guide us toward brighter tomorrows. We want to hear your thoughts. Did the revelations resonate with your own life experiences, or maybe inspire you to consider how destiny can bring people together in the most unexpected ways? Comment below and let's discuss. Together we can celebrate the power of hope, healing, and the willingness to embrace what life has in store.